For more stories like these, go to www.social-tv.co.za, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on our social mediums.
Today we have a chat to Mike Hanley, who is the Managing Director of New Leaf Technologies, about the growing role of e-learning and learning online. That's our social newscast with me, Sam Marshall, brought to you by www.social-tv.co.za. Mike, thank you very much for your time. Just talk to us about this 270% increase in online learning. That's from January to May 2020. Obviously, one of the key issues, it's the coronavirus, but there must be other factors that have been considered.
Well, of course, a lot of workers have been furloughed and sitting at home with a bit of time on their hands, and some of those workers have practical jobs that, require them to be on site. So I think part of the reason, of course, being COVID related, is now around digital access and just having the flexibility of now having the possibility of working remotely, and part and parcel of that is also being taught how to manage that time effectively and using that time productively on training and upskilling, so that when you come back into the workforce, you are upskilled and better equipped to do the work.
Mike, as somebody who's a leader in this space, if you had to compare last year with this year and then factor in one or two other components like accessibility to affordable data, handsets, when you speak to other leaders in your space, how do you guys attribute for this 270% increase?
Well, there's a concept called synchronous and asynchronous learning. So what synchronous learning is basically in time with a facilitator or a trainer. So you are basically conducting training in the same geographical location and same time. Obviously, that's quite difficult to manage in any case, regardless of where your workspace is, because of there's geographical limitations and there's also time-bound limitations. Where I've seen a huge adoption or increase is making use of the synchronous learning time, but recording those sessions and then making them asynchronous. So what they're doing is conducting as they would the normal classroom-based sessions, but then converting that into a digital session so that learners have access anytime, anywhere, and it's something that they only have to do once, which also mitigates a lot of cost factors.
You guys recently had a workshop, a free e-learning Indaba online.
That's correct. Yeah, we had an online webinar called the e-learning Indaba, and it's something that we are very well known for. In fact, we usually don't do it online. We have a conference twice a year, which we will be doing next year, February as well. But really for us, what is really important for us is that there's a lot of education and awareness of what the industry is doing. So it's not so much a sales pitch from our company, but it's also trying to uplift the industry itself. So we get a lot of important players from all over the world to come and present at these e-learning Indabas. So we had someone called Cindy Pascal from Minnesota, the United States. She basically spoke on the importance of inclusion and diversity and what HR's role is to what their responsibilities lie in and how to change that ethos and that culture within an organization and how that couples into e-learning. And then we had Tesh van Zandert from a New Spring in the Netherlands, and his was really primarily around, training companies and what business models are required, especially in light of recent times. How do you adopt new business models to really, drive home new markets? Because, of course, classroom-based training is no longer an option. Face-to-face training is no longer an option, and a lot of training companies are losing out big time. They're losing revenue quickly. So, it's taking logical and practical steps towards relooking at their business model, but the benefits far outweigh, the risks, because previously you'd have maybe 2 or 3 training locations based around the country with facilitators, and around access, it's all to do with logistics and time. Whereas now going digital, you're removing those geographical limitations and the time-bound limitations. So it's actually given a huge emphasis on entrepreneurship drive towards adopting new markets, and they've got better reach, further reach within doing it.
You keep on mentioning the word limitations. And for me, when I think of the word limitations, especially in what online learning and e-learning can provide, is it a fair thing to say that maybe a limitation could be the understanding of the value that e-learning can bring into a space? I know that you guys work with both private and public sector institutions. Have you seen resistance to the potential of e-learning, online learning?
Yes, obviously less so in recent months, but I think there's that sort of old school terminology where, they teach in classrooms and they think it's going to be the same for the next 25 years. But, I think Mother Nature's got a strange way of enforcing change management, and that's exactly what COVID has done. So the resistance has always been prevalent, but because you get access to more data from an analytical standpoint, you can get a more personalized approach than a one size fits all classroom based approach. You can really drill down into where learners are struggling, what areas they're struggling in, where their knowledge gaps are, and you can come up with better corrective interventions to assist those learners in understanding and comprehending those topics. So I think, of course, there will always be some hesitance because it's something new. So the awareness of the industry is also fairly new. Adoption hasn't been great up until late, but I really think that, in light of recent events, the drive is there, and it's definitely paying dividends for people that are adopting it.
Talking about those limitations or in some pockets there's still resistance, what were some of the outcomes in your Indaba regarding HR's role in diversity, inclusion, and equity?
Well, one thing that always pops up, especially in conversation with South African institutions, academic institutions, and businesses alike, and even end users, is around digital access. And when you think about inclusivity, you have to consider different learning styles and approaches to accommodate different backgrounds, to accommodate different disabilities. It's quite difficult for someone who may be blind to jump online and do text-based e-learning. It's just not going to happen. So you have to be inclusive in your approach. But I think digital access is quite a key challenge because obviously data costs are quite high. Not everyone has the connectivity needed to actually go online and do their learning. But there are quite a lot of routes or options available, such as reverse billing, where it's a centralized billing from a data perspective, which kind of mitigates the end user in paying for the data that's required in going online and doing their lessons. A lot of offline learning capabilities are also coming into play where, they'd go to a Wi-Fi connection point, download their materials, and then, during their commute or while they have at home where they perhaps don't have internet, they're still able to access content, go through their learning materials, and then all that data, all their results, gets synchronized once they do have access to internet connection.
We know that this industry is going to, but we're talking about 380 billion projected around the e-learning space in the next year to 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
How do we, and maybe I don't know if this is a very protectionist question, but how do we protect the industry in South Africa so that you don't have the bigger players overseas with their big budgets infiltrating this space, and we can give proudly South African companies the opportunity to grow in what seems to be a fairly big pool?
Well, to me, that's quite an easy one to answer. We work with a number of international companies from a technology standpoint, but one thing that really sticks out is things like offering local support services, where your bigger companies, you send support tickets through, they might take 2 or 3 days to get back. Going local, you should have access to decision makers within the business that you're partnering with. And from a support service or any sort of service-based offering, the costs involved are obviously a lot lower. And also the service support, I think, is a lot standard because you're not waiting and, the time zones are not different. So I think there's a lot of benefit. And also the market in South Africa is very unique. If you think about things like the SETAs, the Sector Educational Training Authorities, there's certain governing bodies and institutions that you have to adhere to from a compliance standpoint. And those issues are not known outside of South Africa. That's not something that anyone has expertise outside of South Africa. So you need people within the country that do have those expertise to give greater advice and better services. One also has to consider things like the POPIA Act and being compliant from a security standpoint, where that data is being kept in terms of learner results, records, and those sorts of things. And there's options and opportunities to keep that within our borders, which is actually quite an important factor.
Final question from me. You guys seem to be on the pulse. It's as if you guys don't sleep at all and you're constantly thinking about how is technology, the role it plays, how does that human interface look like? I mean, some of the things that over the last couple of months, we've talked about this massive increase in online learning. You're doing these free Indaba online conferences, and you're asking pertinent questions around the role of diversity, sustainable business. You've even looked at things, for example, like taking the exam system online. What do you see the barriers to being? Why are we not adopting this much faster than what we should be?
Well, I think adoption is probably the worst place it'll be right now. I think from here it's a pertinent foundation that's only going to increase as time goes on. You mentioned the online assessments. One thing that's quite challenging, you can imagine doing an exam remotely. There's no one to invigilate and ensure that you're not cheating. So, we do have our finger on the pulse, and we're looking for opportunities to provide things like exam integrity to ensure that there is no cheating, there's validity in the exam, in the program. And, some of the ways we do that is through facial and audio recognition. So when learners are required to conduct and do the exam online, we actually use their web cameras on their laptops, for instance, to track whether or not, A, it's the person who signed up for the course, and B, whether or not they're opening up new tabs and searching for answers, or, if they get up and walk away, there's a suspicion alert that goes alongside that. And if it's too suspicious, a certificate doesn't get unlocked. And that's all put forward right up front, but it's one of the ways to keep credibility, and one of the ways I think institutions will have to adopt quite soon, or they'll probably be falling behind.